David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We're starting today with something that's sort of really funny, but also sad, and really just a sign of how disconnected from facts and rationality we have gotten as a matter of sort of standard political discourse in the United States. And I'll explain. Yesterday, there were impeachment hearings. They were the first hearings in the Judiciary Committee. Everything in the weeks prior was in the House Intelligence Committee led by Adam Schiff. Yesterday, nearly 9 hours of hearings. We were there for every minute, live streaming. 9 hours of hearings overseen in the Judiciary Committee by Congressman Jerry Nadler. And Democrats brought in three well-known legal scholars to lay out the case for why Donald Trump's actions meet the standard required for impeachment. Now, this is not anything about would articles be filed, how would the trial go, how would senators vote. It's merely legal experts saying, here's the standard for impeachment, here is historical information, here is legal information, and here is how Trump's actions fit into that. They were Professors Noah Feldman, Pamela Karlan, and Michael Gerhardt who did this. It was, again, nearly 9 hours of hearings. The Republican strategy was mostly talk only to their witness. They brought one witness, Republicans did, Jonathan Turley, and focus merely on how he believes there is no need to impeach. There is no case for impeachment. But when Republicans did talk to the three witnesses called by the Democratic majority in the House of Representatives, the strategy was attack them, attack their credibility, attack them personally as biased partisan actors rather than the legal experts that they are. And one of the funniest such attacks was from a congressman named Matt Gaetz. Now, if you don't know Matt Gaetz, you're probably much happier in your life than people who do know who this guy is, because he is such bottom feeding, Anyway, he is one of the basest bomb throwers of the "we always defend Trump" movement or camp. He tries to go after Professor Karlan by pointing out that she made legal political contributions, and he really sounds very dumb doing it. Take a look at this.
Thank you. I appreciate your testimony. Professor Karlan, you gave $2,000, or you gave $1,000 to Elizabeth Warren, right?
I believe so.
You gave $1,200 to Barack Obama?
I have no reason to question that.
And you gave $2,000 to Hillary Clinton?
That's correct.
Why so much more for Hillary than the other two?
Because I've been giving a lot of money to charity recently because of all of the poor people in the United States.
Well, those aren't the only folks you've been given to.
There's lots of poor people in the U.S. I found Professor Karlan quick-witted and impressive and formidable, as we often hear floated around. Gaetz continued with this brutal prosecution of Pamela Karlan. Take a listen.
Now, have you ever been on a podcast called Versus Trump?
I think I was on a live panel that the people who ran the podcast called Versus Trump.
On that, do you remember saying the following? Liberals tend to cluster more. Conservatives, especially very conservative people, tend to spread out more, perhaps because they don't even want to be around themselves. Did you say that?
Yes, I did.
Do you understand how that reflects contempt on people who are conservative?
No, what I was talking about there was the natural tendency, if you put the quote in context, the natural tendency of a compactness requirement to favor a party whose voters are more spread out.
Well,
and I do
Professor,
not have contempt
hold on.
for
Again,
conservatives.
I'm very limited on time, Professor. And so I just have to say, when you talk about how liberals want to be around each other and cluster, and conservatives don't want to be around each other, and so they have to spread out, it makes people, you may not see this from, like the ivory towers of your law school, but it makes actual people in this country feel like, excuse me, you don't get to interrupt me on this time. Now, let me also suggest that when you invoke the president's son's name here, when you try to make a little joke out of referencing Barron Trump, that does not lend credibility to your argument. It makes you look mean.
So understand, this is all they have. If they had more, they would use it. She was on a podcast in talking about how the districting requirements help Republicans. They are biased towards conservative. These are the requirements that got us the gerrymandering that we now have that so favors Republicans. While she was talking about that on a podcast, she throws in sort of a joke, but it's not even really a joke because it actually does go to why there is a structural advantage for Republicans in districting. Conservatives don't even want to be near each other. It is true that conservatives have more rural tendencies. In other words, there is a systemic structural bias where the party, the movement that is more interested in living rurally rather than living in an urban or more condensed fashion, compact fashion, that is going to help Republicans have more districts, even with lower population density. Anyway, understand that this is an attempted attack on her credibility, but it does nothing to assail her legal knowledge, which she was there to provide and did in an extremely accurate and precise way. Then Gaetz brings up Trump's son. This was so overblown. Carlin said during the hearings in talking about how Trump can't be allowed to just control everything. It can't be just everything is the way Trump wants. She said Trump doesn't get to make Barron a baron, meaning she doesn't get to make his son, Barron Trump, a monarch, right? A baron is a sort of, I think, entry-level monarch of some kind. And Republicans went crazy pretending that it was an attack on a kid. It's a complete and total joke because that's all that they had. Here's one other moment where another Republican tried to get them to reveal by a show of hands how they voted in 2016, which is, of course, something they don't have to answer. He's allowed to ask. They don't have to answer. This is Republican Tom McClintock trying that as a strategy to attack the character of the witnesses.
Mr. McClintock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I begin just with a show of hands? How many on the panel actually voted for Donald Trump in 2016?
I don't think we're obligated to say anything about how we cast our ballots.
Just show of hands.
I will not.
I think you've made your positions, Professor Carlin, very clear.
The gentleman will suspend the clock too.
I have a right to cast a
excuse me, you may ask the question.
All right, let me rephrase the question. How many of you
The clock is
supported?
stopped for the moment. The gentleman may ask the question. The witnesses don't have to respond.
How many of
the
you
gentleman's time is
supported
restored.
Donald Trump in 2016? Show of hands. Thank you.
Not raising our hands is not an
Professor-
indication of an answer, sir.
This is all they had. Tell us how you voted. Did you once make a joke on a podcast years ago? Still, I maintain, nothing may come of this. But the lines of questioning from Republicans made it so clear that they know they have nothing because this is what they had to resort to. Unfortunately, also, that probably played really well. I didn't watch any of the Fox News stuff yesterday, but it wouldn't be surprising to me if they had video of Matt Gaetz talking about a podcast that Professor Carlin appeared on and framing it as, wow, what a brutal indictment. It wouldn't shock me, but big picture, we know that this type of stuff works, even though it is completely not based in assessing the most important thing here, which is the legal case for the impeachability of Donald Trump. As if the entire worldwide embarrassment that is the Trump-Ukraine fiasco could get any more embarrassing right now, we've learned that Donald Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is back in Ukraine right now. He's in Ukraine right now. And what is Rudy doing back in Ukraine? He is talking once again to former prosecutors that were part of how this entire scandal started in the first place. Look at what Giuliani is doing as per the New York Times. Tuesday, he met with a former Ukrainian prosecutor in Budapest. This is Yuri Lutsenko. That name, if you've been watching the impeachment inquiry hearings, should ring a bell because it has come up dozens of times during those hearings. Wednesday, he went to Kiev, or Kyiv, as we are now told is the Ukrainian pronunciation. Went to Kyiv, Ukraine, to meet with more Ukrainian prosecutors, including the infamous Viktor Shokin, who is almost at the center of this entire controversy. The reason why Rudy is back in the region, back in Ukraine, meeting with these people now, he's supposedly gathering information to be part of a documentary series for a right-wing media outlet meant to promote Trump and to defend Trump against the case for impeachment. What a convenient trip for Rudy Giuliani, right? Imagine you're running impeachment hearings centered around Trump and his associates. using Ukraine to try to smear Joe Biden in a bribery extortion scandal. And you say, okay, you know who we should really bring in? Let's bring in Rudy Giuliani. He should testify. Let's get in touch with Rudy. We did. You know what? Turns out he can't come to the hearings because he's in Ukraine right now, meeting with the exact same people, asking for information that can be used in a right-wing media piece to argue that there is no case for impeachment against Donald Trump. Hearings about Rudy possibly committing or organizing crimes to help the president. Sorry, he can't make it. He's tied up back in Ukraine, possibly committing crimes or organizing crimes to help the president under the guise of he's now a TV producer, I guess, working on some right-wing media documentary meant to defend Donald Trump. And you know what? We really shouldn't be surprised by this. Remember that when about, I think it was 6 months ago, Donald Trump was interviewed by George Stephanopoulos on ABC News. And George Stephanopoulos said to him, Mr. President, after everything that's happened with Russia, after the Mueller probe, this, that, all this different stuff, if Russia came to you with dirt on opponents for 2020, or China came to you with dirt on opponents for 2020, would you go to the FBI or would you accept it? And Trump said, yeah, I'd at least look into it. Go to the FBI. No, probably not. But I would at least look into what they were bringing me. And if I were them, if I was as immoral as they are, I would probably be doing the same thing because there have been no consequences. If you are Trump and you see, well, so far I've gotten away with everything. Sure, some of my old friends are in prison, but I'm fine. I would probably assume impeachment's going nowhere, likely accurate. And that means I still have to figure out how to win in 2020. Dispatch Rudy back to Ukraine, accept the dirt from Russia, accept dirt from China. At this point, I would hope that authorities are watching Rudy Giuliani's movements, which actually leads me to the next question. Was it that great of an idea to have him leave the country, in the sense that his two henchmen, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, were grabbed by authorities, arrested and indicted as they were heading to Europe on one-way plane tickets? Giuliani might be close behind them, or he might never see consequences at all. We just don't know, because when someone is in that second justice system, when you're in the justice system for what are effectively the American oligarchs, not everybody else, you actually, it becomes harder to predict whether you'll ever be held accountable for your actions at all. So Rudy, back in Ukraine, it sounds stranger than fiction, but that's the reality. If this were a screenplay, it wouldn't be believable. It would be thrown onto the cutting room floor. It happens to be real life. Let me know what you think about Rudy in Ukraine. I'm on Twitter @dpacman, or leave a reply if you're watching on YouTube.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day are Timothy Hay and Vitek Veseli. Thank you so much to Timothy and Vitek for signing up. I also want to say thanks to Wendy Knoll. Wendy's been a member for almost 5 years, and I appreciate all 5 of those years, Wendy. Join these great folks. Sign up at joinpakman.com, the #1 way to support the show. We are now down to the wire. We are now 11 months away from the 2020 election. We need to be supporting independent media. The establishment is just not cutting it for us. Consider supporting this show or other independent media shows. Joinpakman.com is the place to sign up. We have a subreddit for the David Pakman Show, which is one of the larger sort of single show subreddits for progressive media. We have over 16,000 of our viewers and listeners subscribed at davidpakman.com/Reddit. There's actually more than one example, but I picked one. There are a lot of posts showing up on our subreddit about people concerned at Bernie's dropping poll numbers. Here's one example from a user named SomeJerk27, who says Bernie Sanders has been dropping in the polls. There's been a lot of talk about Buttigieg rising and Warren going down, but I haven't heard as much about what's happening to Bernie. Bernie picked up some speed in the last 2 months, getting up to 19% on average. But in the last couple of weeks, he's fallen down again to only 15%. He's still technically in second place, but that's only because Warren continues falling. This is worrying for me as a Bernie supporter. We've got to find a way to get him back up again. Stop Buttigieg, defeat Joe Biden. Although I don't like her as much as Bernie, Warren's fall is also worrying. So there are a lot of people sharing this concern. I'm actually going to be doing a commentary where I will explain how the establishment getting behind Pete Buttigieg actually helps Joe Biden, even though the instinct might be that it divides the establishment vote between Biden and Buttigieg. And this is playing into the dynamics of what's going on with Bernie and Warren. All I can say to you is, while I don't believe that the polls are inaccurate, it is still early enough that anyone who's in the running can still win. There are 4 key primaries, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, that will actually set the tone. Of course, the polling gives us a sense of how those are going to go. But focus in, if you want to see Bernie carry this through to the nomination, focus in on getting involved in those 4 states, particularly Iowa and New Hampshire, since those are the first 2. I don't think anything is a foregone conclusion. I get emails from people who delusionally say Bernie is definitely going to be the nominee. Well, that's not clear. But I also get emails from people who say Bernie is done, and that's definitely not the case at this point. Pete Buttigieg's rise is evidence of that. He looked like he was out a few months ago. He's now right in there, actually polling as high as Bernie and Warren in some polls, although he's still in 4th place on average. So my advice to you is, if you don't like what's going on, get active. We know the strategy. There's 4 states, 4 key states that you can get involved in, and it is still early enough for Bernie Sanders to do very well, but he might not as well. And I think that only being tied to reality is the best path forward. He's not obviously going to win. He's not obviously going to lose. It's going to come down to what happens in the next few months. Another post I saw, what's happening to David, asks Rickard58. I'm a longtime listener of the show. David's recent takes on Latin America and his concern trolling on Medicare for All have me wondering if he's moving more to the center or if he's trying to appeal more to the intellectual dark web cultist crowd in some of his videos. What are your thoughts? Well, 2 things on this. Number one, from a qualitative standpoint, my views on these issues, none of my views on these issues have changed. I've always been for Medicare for all, but understood the practical difficulty of making it a reality, and I'm still for Medicare for all. There's been no change. My views on Latin American politics have been the same for, I don't know, years and years and years. It may be that my audience is changing around me. It may be that my audience isn't changing and I'm not changing, but that there are more other ideas that are getting traction in media and thus creating a contrast with me. That's certainly a possibility. As far as moving to the center, I've had the pleasure of publicly doing those political spectrum quizzes. There's so many different ones. There's the 8 values one. There's political compass. There's one called Politiscales or something like that. I've done all of these over the years, and I've actually moved to the left on every single one of those tests. I'm more to the left today than I ever was. So that's, I guess, all I have to say about it. Join the discussion at davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT. I think you're going to love this next segment. One of the big revelations of the last 10 days in the American political world is that a Republican congressman named Devin Nunes is part of the problem rather than being someone investigating the problem. What I mean by that is Devin Nunes was part of that group that was having meetings in Europe looking for dirt on Joe Biden, encouraging others to smear Joe Biden, all with the goal of getting foreign help in Donald Trump's reelection campaign. It just so happens that Devin Nunes is also on the House Intelligence Committee. So in the impeachment hearings from 3 weeks ago, Devin Nunes was getting to ask questions of witnesses when in reality, he should be a witness. He is actually more of a co-conspirator rather than an investigator. But over the last week, it's actually gotten even worse. There is now a call log which shows that Devin Nunes was directly in touch on his phone with not only Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump's lawyer, who's been spearheading lots of this insanity, but also with a guy named Lev Parnas. Lev Parnas is one of Rudy Giuliani's key henchmen in this entire thing. And Lev Parnas, along with Igor Fruman, were arrested while trying to flee to Europe on one-way tickets. They've since been indicted. Lev Parnas is now cooperating with investigators and says he was in touch with Devin Nunes and he can demonstrate that Devin Nunes was part of this entire thing. So now we get this call log, and the call log corroborates there was contact between Nunes and Parnas. There was contact between Nunes and Giuliani and the whole lot of them. So that gets us to a segment on Fox News yesterday. I really, really love this. There's a guy named Gregg Jarrett. That's Greg with 2 G's, in case you're going to Google that, who's been on Fox News for a very long time. And Donald Trump loves Gregg Jarrett. He has been talking up Gregg Jarrett for months. You will very often see Donald Trump retweet, quote, legal analyses from Gregg Jarrett, from a guy named Mark Levin, and from some other people. And Trump says Gregg Jarrett is really the guy who understands what's going on. He understands that I did nothing wrong, and Gregg Jarrett is going to be able to explain it all to you. So asked about this call log, which shows that indeed Lev Parnas and Devin Nunes and Rudy Giuliani, Devin Nunes was in touch with them, and he's really more a part of the problem than someone who can be investigating what went on. Jarrett suggests on Fox News, this is just amazing, without any evidence. He says, even the call log might not really corroborate anything because someone might have used Devin Nunes's phone to make those phone calls. This is the most absurd. We've reached the limit of motivated reasoning. We've reached the peak of baseless speculation and just an abundant violation of the principle of Occam's razor, which I'll get to in a second. Check out what Gregg Jarrett had to say.
The only thing new that I picked out of yesterday's was this communication between Devin Nunes, Rudy Giuliani, and the White House. In what way, if any, is that problematic?
Well, we just don't know because we don't know the details. In fact, it's a call log. Does that mean that Devin Nunes was actually on the call or somebody else? And we don't know the import of it. Frankly, I don't trust Adam Schiff.
So absent any evidence, Jarrett introduces this idea. Maybe someone took Devin Nunes's phone to make those phone calls. Or I guess even less believable would be maybe Nunes said to someone, here, take my phone and call Lev Parnas and Rudy Giuliani. Whatever version you are believing is what Gregg Jarrett is suggesting doesn't make any sense. Now, fiction has become reality. On Tuesday, when the call log leaked, I saw tweets I thought jokingly saying, they're going to come up with something like it wasn't really Devin Nunes using the phone, or the call log was spoofed, or someone hacked his phone to make the phone calls and it really wasn't Devin Nunes. And then yesterday, Gregg Jarrett actually pulls that idea on national television and suggests it. And the most troubling thing about it, I know you know where I'm going, is that some people are going to fall for it. Not definitively, but it'll give them enough plausible deniability so that even though there's no evidence, they will say, well, okay, it looks like the call log corroborates what Lev Parnas said, but do we know for sure that that was Devin Nunes on the phone? In the same way that I might have been coerced into saying something on this show. Can you really believe what I'm saying on this show really what I think, or did someone hold me at gunpoint just off camera and force me to do it? I guess it's possible, but absent any evidence, why would we go to that? Occam's razor. Which explanation fits what we know with the fewest assumptions? Well, Devin Nunes is known to be super sketchy. Lev Parnas says he was in touch with Nunes. The call record says Parnas was in touch with Nunes. Or maybe someone took Devin Nunes's phone and called exactly the people that Lev Parnas says Nunes was in touch with in order to falsely incriminate Devin Nunes or for some other reason. This is a suggestion that should be laughed away until someone can come up with some evidence. But otherwise, we're in the world of, wow, someone might fall for this. Well, then let's say it and see who we pull in. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with low information Trumpists, you're going to pull some people in with this nonsense. Incredible. We'll follow up on this with a clip on our Instagram page, at David Pakman Show on Instagram. Make sure you're following us there. While you're there, follow me on Instagram too. I'm posting stuff too at david.pakman. We'll take a quick break. We'll be back right after this with Dr. John Gartner with a new report, and then much more later on in the program.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome to the program today, back to the program, I should say, Dr. John Gartner, founder of Duty to Warn, co-editor of Rocket Man, Nuclear Madness and the Mind of Donald Trump. He taught in the Department of Psychiatry at Johns Hopkins Medical Center for 28 years. John, great to have you back on today.
Great to be back. I really enjoyed being on your show.
So listen, I don't even know where to start because since you were last on, you've been tracking what is concerning behavior by the President of the United States from a mental health perspective. We had this unexpected visit to Walter Reed Hospital in November. We don't have any particular reason to think that it was mental health or cognitive related specifically, but we don't really have a very clear answer as to why he did go. The idea that it was getting a jump on next year's physical is hard to believe at best. What are you seeing over the last few months? How much have you been looking at this Walter Reed thing?
Well, actually, to go to the Walter Reed thing, I have a theory about this based on no facts.
Good.
Although apparently it was reported that he had reported some kind of chest pains. That had been reported. I don't know if it had been verified.
I saw that it was speculated and denied by the White House, but their denials don't mean very much.
Don't mean anything, right? What they deny, they confirm in most cases. But actually, given his fast food diet and his being overweight and his being high on cholesterol, that's not unsurprising. But actually, a lot of people don't realize this, but chest pains is one of the most common presentations at an emergency room. And 90% of the time, it's a panic attack.
Right.
So all this started when the impeachment stuff started heating up. So my theory, based, again, as I say, on speculation, is he may have experienced chest pains as his presenting problem, but really he was having a panic attack. Actually, if he was having a panic attack, that might be the most reality-centered thing that he's done.
Well, that's why I actually speculated that it may have been one of those situations where you feel like you're having a heart attack and they do tests and the doctor comes out and says, you didn't have a heart attack. I think that this was a panic attack. What makes me skeptical about that is it seems that Trump lacks the personality traits that would get him to actually panic, because that requires sort of some self-awareness of the situation you're in.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very good point. In fact, part of his personality disorder is a lack of anxiety over being caught or punished, or that these psychopaths don't seem to weigh the probable risks and consequences of their behavior. All these people in jail, what did they think they were? How did they think they were even going to get away with it? But somehow they thought they were. So I agree with you about that. But the walls are really closing in on him. And this is one of the reasons, actually, that we should be very, very concerned right now. We predicted this actually a couple of years ago, and even more strongly a year ago, that this day of reckoning would come. That someday he would be held accountable. We thought it was going to be for the Mueller investigation. We didn't know that the Ukraine situation was even going to emerge. We couldn't see that in our crystal ball. But that once the S hit the fan, I don't know what you can say, what words we can say on your platform, that he was going to decompensate and that he would become even more dangerous. Because first of all, the situation is his cognitive decline has continued. He now, however, has created a situation where there are no safety on the gun. There are no adults in the White House anymore. And this is what these dictators do. They purge the government and the bureaucracy of anyone who isn't slavishly loyal and sycophantic. So not only in his administration, but we found out today that he's fired a third of the diplomats. He's getting rid of anyone, not only the ones in Ukraine that he tried to get rid of, but anyone who could possibly stand in his way or say no or offer a conflicting opinion or provide expertise or information which contradicts his crazy conspiracy theories. All those people have been removed. And now he's in a state of maximum agitation. As we said in our last op-ed in USA Today, we think he may be even having a bit of a hypomanic episode. And that would kind of fit with the chest pain thing, meaning his whole energy level is now at a frantic pace. And if you look at his activities, they're becoming even more erratic. Look, I think most recently, very dramatically, was his withdrawal from Syria, where he literally had a conversation with the head of Turkey, president of Turkey, and then picked up the phone and told the troops to start withdrawing without discussing it. He didn't even discuss it with one member of his own administration.
Now, something like that, could that just be that he's ignorant and doesn't care what anyone else thinks, but not necessarily indicative of a cognitive concern?
Well, I think here that it's really the psychiatric point I was making here is that there's something impulsive and accelerated. So there's something manic about his decision making now. And actually, if you read the descriptions of his tweets, this is when the impeachment thing just started heating up, people were commenting on the tweets being manic. That was one of the words people kept using to describe them, because he was like tweeting like 30, 40, 50 times a day, with this sort of screed that was completely off the hook. But in other words, that's not abnormal for him. But now he was doing it more and more quickly and more rapidly and more frequently, so that there's kind of a way in which the water is boiling now. The boiling point has it's boiling over, is what I'm really trying to say. So in
terms of some of the policy stuff can be sort of a proxy to his cognitive state. But last time we talked, we had all of these examples of the slurring, which we don't know if is maybe related to sort of some kind of drug abuse or cognitive decline. There was him repeating that he wants to find the oranges of an investigation. He repeated it twice, and you could see that he seemed to have some recognition that he was saying something that didn't make sense, but sort of unable to correct it. We had him getting off of Air Force One and wandering away from his car and having to be brought back. Something similar happened in Argentina when he wandered off stage after being introduced and shaking hands with the president. Are we seeing more of those things, or are we mostly looking at sort of through policy as a proxy?
No, actually, in honor of your show, I made a little sheet of the latest signs of cognitive decline. First of all, I just want to point out this excellent book from Anonymous summarizes it very well when they say he stumbles, he slurs, he gets confused, he can't synthesize information, he can't remember anything, and this doesn't just happen sometimes. So that's a summary. But most recently in the past few months, for example, when he was speaking to the troops, this is just a month ago, he said, "Our armed forces have always lived by the words of Douglas MacArthur." You notice in both those cases, he didn't finish the word. This is really a phonetic paraphasia that we really only see in people who are either drunk or developing Alzheimer's. But no, there's an organic brain problem, either temporary or permanent. But in his case, it's not temporary, so it can't be that he's drunk.
Okay, so let's look at that. That's actually very interesting. So this is a symptom which you as a mental health professional can say, there is a limited number of explanations for that particular symptom. And for example, the alleged dyslexia that some suspect Trump has, that would not be a possible explanation for that linguistic phenomena.
No, because people who I have dyslexia, as a matter of fact, I don't because look at some of these other examples. Instead of stock market, he said sock rocket. He couldn't pronounce obsolete or applicable. He said at NATO just this week that U.S. has the most powerful military in the world. He wanted to say powerful, but he said powerful. He couldn't finish the word. So this kind of, so to get to your point, we have a term in psychiatry that something can be pathognomonic, meaning if someone has that symptom, we know what the illness is, because there's, as you say, a limited number of possibilities. There's a very limited number of possibilities for this kind of breakdown in the ability to speak English. And it's not just pronunciation, it's also comprehension. So he's showing a loss in his ability to comprehend, in the complexity of his sentences, in his ability to stay on topic without going off on an irrelevancy, on his repetitions. Repetition is actually a sign of cognitive decline. He keeps saying the same thing over and over again. His use of superlatives, everything's the greatest or the worst, or there's no nuance in the words. And also his memory. Remember, he said his father was born in Germany when it was his grandfather that was born in Germany. Well, he recently said to the president of Italy, who he called President Mozzarella instead of Mozzarella, and said, "We've been allies since ancient Rome." I mean, he's getting time. America didn't exist. America was filled with Native Americans during the time of ancient Rome. So, in other words, he's getting all these times confused and places confused and names confused. It's more of a generic breakdown. Even his balance is poor. There's a generic with Alzheimer's. There's a breakdown in all of the cognitive functions, all of them. And that's
so that actually, you mentioned so let me bring up one other element related to the Walter Reed visit. Let's imagine that we just don't know what the Walter Reed visit was about. One of the things that was observed afterwards was that he was getting off of Air Force One from the low stairs rather than the high stairs, and that at least one time when getting off of the high stairs, he had a senator walking right next to him, really kind of keeping him up against the railing.
Yeah.
Again,
Propping him up.
Propping him up was the sort of colloquial way that it was described. Does
Yeah.
that tell us anything in terms of how it
Yes.
might connect with what you're discussing?
Yes. Loss of balance goes with it. Because again, all of the mental functions are deteriorating, including the ability to maneuver physically in space. So his stumbling verbally and his stumbling physically are part of the same generic overall deterioration.
What would be the test that would determine whether something is going on here?
Well, we've been calling for 2 years now for him to get a neuropsychological battery of tests. It's a battery of tests that evaluate people at their cognitive functioning at a whole bunch of levels with a whole bunch of different tasks. What we actually asked Ronnie Jackson, his doctor, we actually sent a letter with 70 doctors asking him to give him the MoCA, which he did. And he passed the MoCA, which he said proved he was a stable genius and more intelligent than all past presidents, which is a little bit like saying, I passed a first grade exam and that makes me Mensa. Most kindergartners, just to give you a sense, can pass the MoCA. It's things like, can you identify a camel? Can you repeat 3 words backwards?
Yeah, but are they the smart kindergartners?
No, the ones who couldn't do it, we would hold them back.
Right.
So it's true. He hadn't reached that level of dementia. But, one of the people in the anonymous book said that Trump is sort of like going to the White House is kind of like going to a nursing home and your uncle is running around the courtyard without pants. In other words, he's not at the point where he's so demented that he can't remember his own name or won't recognize his own children. But he thinks his father is born in Germany and he can't pronounce words and he doesn't remember things. And he can't understand things. So he's given this is a guy who used to go to Ivy League schools, even if his dad got him, and he still went there. And now he's really fallen so far from his own baseline. And that's one of the things that we use to determine cognitive decline is different people have different abilities, right? But we have to compare someone to their own baseline. You look at speeches he made in the 80s, he sounds extremely articulate and bright, even though he sounds like a jerk. And you compare him to now and you see that he's lost 30 or 40 IQ points.
What did you make? I don't know if you saw this, but during the first impeachment hearings, he went out and did one of the helicopter press conference where he had notes about what he reportedly told Gordon Sondland during a phone call. And he seemed very erratic, yelling, "I want nothing, no quit," that very strange, kind of like strained and repeating over and over again. Was there anything about that episode that either coincides with or goes against the impression that you're getting from his other behavior?
Well, first of all, the fact that he has to carry notes, right, written in Sharpie to say no quid pro quo. It's almost like the MoCA. That's 4 words forward. He can remember 4 words without having to refer to notes. So I think that's already telling you something about his cognitive level of functioning. And the other thing I just want to say is he just says bizarre stuff. Like he was saying yesterday that, the next president, they'll impeach him if he goes to the refrigerator and gets oranges.
Right, but isn't some of this just Trump's personality?
That's where it's really instructive to look at the videos of him in the 80s, because really he was literally the same jerk then that he is now, because a personality disorder is a lifetime disorder. You have it from the time you're young and you have it till you die. And in his case, it's actually gotten worse. We've talked about this in terms of his malignant narcissism. The malignant narcissists gain power, their grandiosity and their paranoia, as well as their sadism and their anti-social, becomes inflamed because now they feel empowered. Like he says, now I'm president, I can do whatever I want, And so his personality disorder actually has gotten worse. But his cognitive functioning is much worse than it was when he was still a jerk as a young man. So we really have now a series of forces that are making him maximally dangerous right now. We were all kind of getting a laugh out of how the world leaders were laughing at him at NATO and them laughing at him. But remember, it was Barack Obama laughing at him that, goaded him to run for president. This is a guy who gets even. Okay, so now he wants to get even with these guys at NATO, our allies, and he's already been antagonistic, but I'm saying he feels like he's on his back. He feels weakened. He feels attacked. And so his response is to do something more aggressive, more destructive, to feel more powerful. And so all of the things that are making him a wounded animal are making him more dangerous now than he ever was.
We've been speaking with Dr. John Gartner, founder of Duty to Warn, co-editor of Rocket Man, Nuclear Madness and the Mind of Donald Trump. He taught in the Department of Psychiatry at Johns Hopkins Medical Center for nearly 30 years. Always so great to have you on.
Yeah, thank you. Always good to be on. I appreciate it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So Donald Trump erratically abandoned the NATO summit early yesterday and flew back to the United States after being ridiculed on camera by a number of world leaders. We already talked about that yesterday. I told you several world leaders were caught on camera making fun of the American president, Donald Trump. It was Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the French President Emmanuel Macron, and Trumpian British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Quick reminder of that video. So again, the literal laughingstock among world leaders. It's not surprising. It's not new if you've been paying attention. So we knew the reaction would be furious from Trump. And indeed, he was furious, throwing a tantrum, then calling Justin Trudeau two-faced, which we'll talk about shortly, and then cutting short his entire trip to the NATO summit and flying back to the United States. Trump was scheduled yesterday to do a press conference at 3:30 in the afternoon local time, canceled it, and came back to the United States. When you elect a clown, you get a circus. Trump, of course, tweeting as if everything is totally fine, claiming another major victory in the world of bigly winning, tweeting just finished meetings with Turkey and Germany, heading to a meeting now with those countries that have met their 2% goals, followed by meetings with Denmark and Italy. When today's meetings are over, I will be heading back to Washington. We won't be doing a press conference at the close of NATO because we did so many over the past 2 days. Safe travels to all. Of course, why would you even, this is like when he said he got on the phone with Sondland and demanded absolutely no quid pro quo. It's like, why are we even talking about a quid pro quo? It's like if I call someone and say, I really need you to pick up my wife, but definitely don't kill her, okay? I'm telling you, do not kill her. Why are we even talking about that? Much the same way, why is Trump even talking about the fact that he's not doing a press conference? He clearly is very triggered over, listen, in the end, wasn't it just locker room talk of sorts that those world leaders were engaging in? I am just so sick of being a constant embarrassment around the world by having this man in the White House, because the office of the presidency has never been more devalued. The trade war is a joke. Trump's positions on NATO are a joke. It's all a joke. And yet, I dare say, 60 million, 62 million, at least 55 million people are going to vote for this for another 4 years of this in just 11 months. That's the scariest part of all of it. And consider how fragile the president is. I listened to a really interesting interview yesterday. Hillary Clinton appeared on the Howard Stern show yesterday. Might sound like a weird conversation. It was absolutely fantastic. I would encourage you to try to find it. If you're a Sirius XM subscriber, I think you can just see it, find it on demand on the app. But otherwise, maybe it's floating around. And she very astutely talked about how she had to sort of measure her reactions. One example that was given was, don't know if you remember the debates back in 2016 between Trump and Hillary, but there would be moments where Trump would start sort of stalking in the background and kind of standing close to Hillary Clinton, and she didn't react to it. And in the conversation with Howard Stern yesterday, she actually said, I knew if I turned around and said, hey, back off or whatever, the headlines would be, She's unhinged. She's going crazy. She can't handle Trump. How will she be able to handle Putin or whatever? Consider the fragility and triggerability of Donald Trump. He mocks women, people with disabilities, foreign leaders, members of the military, including for the fact that they were held as prisoners of war, political opponents. He comes up with nicknames for everybody. And then just because someone was critical of him, he leaves the NATO summit early, calls Justin Trudeau two-faced, and then crafts a narrative that really he won everything and he's taking his 747 and flying home. Did Barack Obama ever do this? Policy differences aside, can anyone imagine Hillary Clinton ever behaving in this way? It's pathetic to a huge degree, but we've become desensitized. I said it yesterday, I think, or the day before. As much as I try not to allow this to happen, I recognize that a lot of this insanity has become normalized because it's been going on for 3 years at this point, or however long it's been. Almost 3 years? Yes, almost 3 years. We need to make sure not only that we don't let the normalization sort of creep in, as it has even for me, but we also are going to have to work really, really hard once this nightmare is over, once the mango menace is gone, to get back to the type of political discourse, which wasn't any beauty, by the way. It had already been degraded significantly, but to get back to the political discourse that existed before Donald Trump. And then ideally we could go back even further, although that will be a much more uphill battle to climb. Let's now talk about Trump self-congratulating on a hot mic. A lot of hot mics this week at the NATO summit in the UK. And now Donald Trump has been caught on one. So I told you that Donald Trump, after finding out that other world leaders were laughing about him, he is a literal laughingstock among world leaders. He threw a tantrum. He left the NATO summit early, but he also insulted Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. After that happened, Trump was caught on a recording congratulating himself about the funny zinger of an insult against Trudeau, calling him two-faced. So let's go through it piece by piece. First here is Donald Trump calling Justin Trudeau two-faced. You be the judge about how much of a biting zinger criticism this was.
Well, he's two-faced.
Do you think that Germany's too naive?
And honestly, with Trudeau, he's a nice guy. I find him to be a very nice guy. But, you know, the truth is that I called him out on the fact that he's not paying 2%.
Okay. And then Trump later, really apparently thinking that that was a great insult, caught on a hot mic saying, wasn't that so funny when I called Justin Trudeau two-faced?
You'll be in double digits for press conferences. Oh, it's crazy. And then you know what they'll say? He didn't do a press conference. He didn't do a press conference. That was funny when I said the guy's two-faced. You know what? I know. They're going.
Oh, yeah. It was super funny when you said he was two-faced, right? Who else heard it? Because that was really funny, guys. Did you hear me? This is cringeworthy. This is like the kid in school who one time said something that was like a 2 out of 10 on the humor scale, and then for weeks at every opportunity brings it up. Remember that time when I said that one thing? Oh, yeah, but we're talking about something else. Oh, yeah, no, but it reminded me of that time where I said that really funny thing. Don't you guys remember how funny that was? That's what this reminded me of. This is such an insecure person at heart. He's giving a blow-by-blow of just a lame comeback to remind people of how he really got the last word and came out on top before he fled back to his airplane and flew back to the United States. What's super clear from this is that Donald Trump is really embarrassed, as he should be. Now, I know a lot of people say, David, he's not embarrassed. He's unable to feel shame. He always thinks he acted correctly. I think that it's a combination. I think it's a combination of his delusions of grandeur, but he is embarrassed to some degree. It might be perceived as anger. He may even see it as anger, but at this point, it's clear that deep down somewhere in there, there is embarrassment there. And this is all he can do to fight back. And in some sense, it's sad. In another sense, it is hilarious to watch it from the sidelines. But the big picture that I want to mention is that this is so emblematic of the problems in the world right now. World leaders are caught expressing concern about Donald Trump's bizarre behavior. In other words, world leaders, when they think people aren't listening or when they don't think they're being recorded, they're talking about how odd and disturbing Donald Trump's behavior is. Trump gets caught on a hot mic, and he's just praising himself for a quite frankly not very funny insult that he told and reminding people around him how funny it was. This is a microcosm of everything that is taking place right now, and it can't end soon enough. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a funny voicemail, and we're going to do something special for this caller. We're going to do something special when we come up with a title for the YouTube clip for this voicemail. Take a listen.
Oh, hey, David Pakman. Robbie in Los Angeles. To be brief, I can't stand videos that have titles like shreds, destroys, obliterates. And I know you title some of your videos that way facetiously, and that your audience, for the most part, knows that. But I wonder if it doesn't add to the stupidity online for people who might not know your show. For instance, sometimes I've shown my friends your videos. Some of them have the facetious titling, and
Yes.
they kind of roll their eyes and I have to explain that you're kidding.
Right.
So I'm just wondering if you're going to keep doing that. It's not a big deal, but I do think it kind of adds to the silliness of the online commentary.
Yeah, so listen, we are going to keep doing it. We do it facetiously. I think it came out of the right, where the right started titling videos like, Ben Shapiro destroys feminist with facts and logic or whatever. And here's what you have to understand. I get what you're saying, that from a completely serious point of view, if we're trying to do serious commentary and we have, a video called Trumpist implodes, impotently trying to defend Trump or whatever, there's some fraction of the audience who might say, oh, just on the basis of that title, I'm not taking this seriously. For the most part, it's just a calculation, the net benefit of doing that. And of course, the fact that after you watch a minute or even 30 seconds, you'll see, oh, okay, this is actually, this is a critique of what went on. I think it's okay. And just for you, just for the caller, we are going to title your voicemail when we upload this to YouTube. We're going to call this Disgusted Caller Obliterates Our YouTube Channel. And you know what? It'll probably do better than if we simply called it Respectful Caller Has Mild Critique of David Pakman's Video Titles or something like that. But in any case, it's the game. We play the game as it needs to be played on different platforms. Our podcast episodes are titled much more soberly because that's what's expected there, and that's what seems to do well with the podcast audience. On YouTube, we play around sarcastically using, some of the sort of memes that right-wingers like to use for titles. It's working fine. I don't predict we're going to change it anytime soon. But notice that with interviews, like when we interview a professor or something like that, we don't use the hyperbolic titles. We just call it, whatever it is, and then put the professor's name. So I think that we are measured enough with our titling strategy. But I appreciate the concern and the support. We've got a great bonus show for you today. George Zimmerman will just not get out of the lives of the family members of Trayvon Martin, now suing the family for $100 million. Hospitals, speaking of lawsuits, it's all lawsuits today on the bonus show. Hospitals are suing Donald Trump over his price disclosure rule that he passed. And then Congressman Devin Nunes is suing CNN over defamation alleged for $435 million. Many lawsuits to discuss on the bonus show today and more. Get instant access. I'm not talking about 20 minutes down the line. You get instant access by signing up at joinpakman.com or by becoming a patron at the $5 level at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. I'll speak to you then or otherwise tomorrow on the Friday show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.